Okay, and welcome back to the AyerWaves Media Sports Show. I am Josh, and here with me is Nate the Foot Brennan and Ben Garrett. Going into Week 8 of the college football season, a lot of fun stuff happened over this past week, a lot of great games. Nate almost got into a fight, but that's neither here nor there. As always, Nate, we're going to throw it off to you. Tell us about your Fighting Irish this past week.
The Fighting Irish won by 10, which is what I predicted last week. Had a little trouble with USC's athletes. A lot of speed on that team, a lot of 5 stars. But in the end, offensive line, defensive line controlled the game. Notre Dame took care of business.
What was your biggest highlight of the game?
Their fastest player for USC getting beat by Notre Dame's fastest player on a 75-yard touchdown pass.
Did you stay for the full game?
No. I shut it off about the third quarter.
Can I tell the rest of the story?
Go.
Because I have talked to an inside source.
Oh, boy.
He says Dad gave up on the Irish in the third quarter,
I did.
and so he turns it off. But Gabe keeps watching. And then when it starts to look a little better for him, Nate comes back downstairs and gets back in the game.
I did. I admit it.
Such a fair weather fan.
I left in a huff. I said, oh, they're going to get embarrassed. They're going to get blown out. I left, went upstairs. I heard my wife and son cheering, so I came back down.
I'm going to forgive you because you were recruited by Butch Johns.
And Rick Pitino at one point. I just like Louisville's recruiting techniques. That's all.
Are they the ones with the hookers?
Yes.
So this was a fantasy. This wasn't a true
Yeah,
story.
this is
Okay,
a complete
I
fantasy.
got you. Sorry. Sorry.
You think he's going to keep his job after everything coming out about the prostitutes and the recruits and the $10,000?
I think he's done.
He survived so far. I mean, he's like Teflon.
There's a lot of,
I mean, this is not his first rodeo.
True,
He's
that
been
is
in
true.
scandals before.
but there's a lot of people, like big names in college basketball, that are starting to turn they're starting to say that it was on his watch. He should be done.
Hey boy, don't you know what you need to do? Listen to Josh's Underground Music Show. Ho, 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 ho.
Welcome back to the AyerWaves Media Sports Show right here on AyerWaves.com. I am Josh. With me is Nate the Foot Brennan and Ben Garrett. Ben, what about this weekend for you? What was your highlight in a game? What was your game of the past weekend?
Michigan State, without a doubt. What a crazy, crazy, crazy ending. I have watched a lot of college football. I've never seen anything like that. And that poor kid. I mean, how would you like to be in his shoes?
He will move out of Michigan.
Yeah, he might have to. He might already be packing his bags. I saw someone on Facebook this weekend, and they said, if you think you're having a bad day, just think it could be worse. You could be the Michigan punter. So, I mean, he's kind of the butt of all jokes now, too. But the only game that I can think of over the years, obviously the Cal, the whole band on the field back in the 80s would probably top that one. Alabama-Auburn is from 2 years ago, the return missed field goal. That's the only one I can think of that comes close. But in that game, it was tied. So Auburn's thinking, worst-case scenario, we're going to go to overtime. But Michigan State was beat. They needed a miracle, and they got a miracle.
Yeah, they
That was
did.
pretty incredible.
It's interesting hearing people talk this week about how they're going to view this for the playoff committee. Like if Michigan State has to go up against somebody from another conference that has the same record, if they're going to view this as a loss, or a win. Like if they're undefeated and they're going up against, say, a Baylor, and for the last spot in the playoff, how they're going to view a game where they basically lost, but through a miracle, like you said, got the win.
Yeah, but if it comes down to if they're undefeated, they've beaten Ohio State.
That's true.
So at that point, I don't think they've got to worry about not making the cut. I don't think they're going to be in that 4 or 5 range. I think they're going to be probably number 1 if that plays out that way. But if it comes down to a one-loss Michigan State team, then at that point, if I'm on the playoff committee, I'm probably going to hold that against them.
Yeah, I agree.
But what about the punter? the punter from Michigan State. The punter from Michigan. They talk about kickers being head cases. Maybe we need to talk about punters being head cases. Because worst case scenario, you got to just fall on that ball, and he pulls off what might have been the most boneheaded play in the history of college football, at least in the history of Michigan football. I mean, that was crazy to try to spin around and punt it. I think he was actually facing the opposite goal line when he tried to punt that football. And it's funny. I mean, you talk about special teams. and what a difference they are in a football game. 2 weeks ago, we saw when Tennessee leads Georgia by 7 late in the game, they're punting the football. We saw maybe the best punt that I've ever seen in that situation when the kid kicks it 55 yards through the air and it bounces out of bounds, literally 6 inches in front of the pylon.
Well,
Okay.
MVP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2 weeks, and that was probably the worst kick I've ever seen in that situation. Just boneheaded.
It brings up the question, though, when you're on Australian football, because he was an Australian football player. Does he really know the way that our football works? When he drops that ball, it would make sense, just fall on the ball. But it's almost like he panicked. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, him being an international player like that, and not really, this is his second year, I guess, playing football, but also when they're Australian, they're moving before they catch the snap. Like they're moving to catch the snap. And I wonder why. I mean, if I was Harbaugh, I would have just said, why not even just put the quarterback back there and do like a pooch punt? You know what I mean? Like a normal. But what an awful way to lose. Too bad for those Wolverines.
It could have been worse. They could have been blown out from the beginning. Now you look at their team, and instead of saying they're a terrible team, you go, they had a terrible play.
And that's what I was saying. As a kid from Michigan State was running down the field before he even crosses the goal line, I'm thinking, man, what a Tennessee way to lose a football game. We have been there and done that. So well, maybe not to that extreme, but
It's with Tennessee, man. When you think about it, we'd be a top 10 football team right now if we hadn't blew those games.
Absolutely. 3 plays away from being in the playoff chase going into the Alabama game. Who would have thought it? Of course, since Alabama's a 14-point favorite, that probably wouldn't have mattered.
I don't think they would have been a 14-point favorite, though, if we would have won those games.
That's probably true. But if you look at it statistically, and you punch in the power ratings and all that, they're about a 13-point favorite. So that's pretty close to what the humans are thinking out in Las Vegas.
What is Tennessee? 3-3?
3-3.
I would go on record in saying they're probably the best 3-3 team in the country, if you really think about it.
Oh, I don't disagree at all.
Because they would be. I would not want to play Tennessee if I was a team. As the year goes on, trying to finish out a year, trying to make it to the playoff. I would not want to see Tennessee on the schedule because they could lose to Kentucky, but they could also beat Alabama, and I think that's the unfortunate thing now for Vol fans is that they're going to be in a lot of games, but they might lose to somebody like Kentucky.
I think there's a better chance of losing to Kentucky than beating Alabama.
Probably.
Unfortunately.
Probably.
Hopefully not, because that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. I mean, if you're on the Butch Jones wagon and you're looking for a reason to stay on the Butch Jones wagon, and this is his 3rd year, and Mark Stoops comes down, and this is his 3rd year at Kentucky, and he beats you. That game's actually up there, but still, Tennessee has got a tremendous amount more talent than Kentucky does.
Yeah, they have to win that game.
And I agree, but you're right. I mean, that's a toss-up. I mean, Kentucky's looking pretty good this season.
All right, and looking at the week ahead, it looks like we have Temple and ECU this week. What a crappy weekend for games.
That's Thursday night, too.
I have to say Temple 6-0, ECU 4-3, ECU being ECU and Temple being Temple at 6-0. I have to go Temple on this game. Really, I don't care.
I actually do care because Notre Dame plays Temple the following week.
So you really need Temple to win.
I want Temple to win. Exactly. Yep. So I want them to win and win big. They need to be undefeated, obviously, to help Notre Dame. But I think East Carolina put up a fight with Florida.
They did. They played them tough. And I was getting ready to say I'm going to call it an upset on this one, but guess what? East Carolina is actually favored by 3 points in this game.
That actually doesn't surprise me. Yeah, ECU's better, I think, than their record.
They have played a tough schedule, and I mean it's easy to forget they had Florida in the 4th quarter. I mean that's a game that they got beat by a couple of scores. That's a game they could have very easily won. They played BYU really close as well. What hurts them? They got blown out by Navy, and that's tough. But I mean they beat Tulsa. Tulsa's got a pretty good team. Beat Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech is Virginia Tech. Frank Beamer's probably lost it, but
yeah,
still, they're Virginia Tech, Power 5 school. That was a good win. So I think ECU pulls it off.
Cal and UCLA. Cal ranked 20 in the country at 5-1, and UCLA at 4-2. And I will say, I was wrong. Stanford, how about those smart kids?
Best quarterback in the nation, everyone said, was that guy from Cal, and he is not. He's not even close. I think UCLA wins this game. Cal's overrated.
I'm going to go with Nate. UCLA wins.
Memphis 6-0, coming off a win over Ole Miss and looking pretty good.
You know what? I wasn't on the Memphis bandwagon before last week. I'm on the bandwagon now. They look good.
Yeah.
I mean, they took care of business against Ole Miss, completely controlled the football game. And you talk about somebody who's living good right now. How would you like to be in his shoes? I mean, he's going to have every school in the country with a job opening calling him after this season, regardless of how this thing plays out. And when you look at Memphis' schedule, I mean, I don't know exactly everybody they've got left, but they're a Conference USA school. You got to think they're going to have probably a pretty good shot, I would think, of going undefeated the rest of the way.
I think it's going to come down between them and Temple, actually. I think they have to play Temple, and the winner will win that, what is that, the AAC? Or whatever? American Athletic Conference?
Yeah, something like that. It's not the SEC, so yeah, it's just one of those other conferences.
But they play Temple, and Temple won't be undefeated at that point. But that'll be actually a possible to get into those Big Six games, because the non-Power 5, the top non-Power 5 has to make it, and that would be a big coup for him if he makes up. I mean, when's the last time Memphis has been in a, what's considered a good bowl game?
Absolutely. I take it a step further than that. I mean, they're 18th in the rankings. We're headed into the start of the second half of the season. Probably not going to happen. But what happens if they stay undefeated? What happens if Temple is still ranked? They play them, and they get a win there. That's an opportunity for a really good resume win. I mean, depending on what happens in front of them in the rankings, they could very well be an outside shot at the playoffs. Yeah. When the end of the season rolls around, if they're still undefeated.
Especially if Ole Miss, goes on.
Exactly.
Because they'll have that they can prop that up.
Yeah, and I think before the Ole Miss game, you don't even talk about that.
No.
But the way that they control that football game, I think you have to. Now, obviously, Ole Miss, when they were number 3 in the country a couple of weeks ago, they were overranked. I think because Florida completely dominated the football game.
Yep.
And now Memphis has dominated them as well. But still, I mean, that's a good win. A good win over a pretty good SEC West school. And so if Ole Miss closes out on a roll and they're ranked at the end of the season and Memphis is undefeated, that's going to be a dilemma for that committee, because they're going to have to take a look at them. There's
going to be a lot of dilemmas. I think it's going to be an awful time to be picking 4 teams out of this group that they're going to have.
Yeah, I think if anybody wants an 18 playoff, this is their year, because it's not going to happen. 1 year is not going to sway things that much, but there are going to be some controversies at the end of this season.
It's going to be a mess, especially if LSU loses to Alabama and LSU finishes with 1 loss, doesn't win the West but beats everybody else, and Alabama already has a loss,
and Alabama's loss came to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And after last season, I mean, does TCU really get left out again? I don't think so, because there was so much controversy. And that took care of itself, because the controversy was, why does Ohio State, with the loss to Virginia Tech, get in ahead of TCU? Ohio State goes on and dominates those 2 games, wins the national championship. But I still think there was so much controversy. You don't leave out TCU. Yeah, and if you're not going to leave out TCU, then if Baylor has the resume, you're not going to leave out Baylor. Somebody from the SEC West is going to be there. Somebody from the Pac-12 is going to be there. Somebody from the Big Ten is going to be there, whether it's Ohio State or Michigan State. Could even be both, potentially, depending on how things plays out. And then if you got somebody from outside these Power 5s, like a Memphis, someone like that, I mean, there could be 7 or 8 teams there this year that have a legitimate argument that they belong as one of those Final 4.
Well, moving on to Houston and UCF, we have Houston at 6-0 in the season, number 21 in the country, against an 0-7 UCF.
Houston.
I see a major upset right here because nobody cares about this game. Nobody.
That would be shocking. I believe UCF is the team that lost to a 1AA school by like 60. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure they lost to a 1AA school. So
No,
Upset of the year.
actually, you're thinking about North Texas State,
yes, that's right.
which fired its
right.
head coach in the
That's
locker
right.
room when that game
Right
was over.
after, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but I mean, still, UCF at 0-7, they're just about as bad.
Yeah.
They lost to South Carolina by 17 points. Okay, ordinarily you say, wow, that's kind of close to be playing an SEC school, but South Carolina is so terrible this year. That, to me, that speaks volumes. And it wasn't just them. They lost to UConn by 27 points.
UConn.
I mean, they haven't played anybody competitively on their schedule. They did play within 2 touchdowns at Temple, but to be honest with you, I think Temple's overranked at
I
this
do
point.
too.
So,
Absolutely.
I mean,
They won't finish this. They won't finish the year ranked. No way.
I wouldn't think so.
No.
So I got to think Houston names their score this weekend. If they're legit, they may be overranked too. I mean, it's hard to tell because they haven't played anybody, with the exception of Louisville. They beat Louisville back in September, but since then they've not played anybody. Coming off a win over Tulane, it's hard to say, but I think Houston wins big.
Pitt and Syracuse. Pitt 25 in the country, 5-1. Syracuse 3-3.
There will literally be 10 people watching this on TV. But Syracuse isn't that good this year either. I'll go with Pitt.
You think fewer people watch this than watch the Houston game?
It could be.
I don't know.
The ratings battle at noon.
Yeah.
Well, it's in Syracuse, but when is the last time the Carrier Dome was an advantage for them? I mean, do they even still play in the Carrier Dome? I'm
They do.
assuming they do.
They do. Yep.
But yeah, I'll go with Pittsburgh.
Well, the noon game that everyone will be watching will be the Baylor game, or potentially the Clemson game. But we have Baylor playing Iowa State. Yeah, Baylor. We can just move on from this.
Over under for Baylor's points. That's the. Do they break 70?
I don't think they break 70, but I bet they get pretty close to 50.
Oh, they'll get way over 50.
I mean, they're favored by 37 points.
Yeah.
How often do you see a Power 5 school favored by 37 over another Power 5 school? You never. I mean, that's got to be close to a record, I would think. Maybe, I don't know. Kansas has probably set that record this year at some point, but yeah, they're going to win big. And I mean, Iowa State's not that terrible, but Baylor is that good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Baylor right now is, I didn't have them in my top 4 last week, but I got to reconsider this week. I think they're good, and they're going to win big.
Yep.
Number 6, Clemson at the U.
This actually could be a good game. Miami's not bad. They played Florida State tough for a half. Clemson going to Miami. Miami doesn't really have a home field advantage, though. But Clemson, I think this game will be close for a half, and then Clemson will pull away.
My thing with Miami is they lost to Cincinnati, and that was a tough loss. I'm hoping Miami pulls it off. Not because I have anything against Clemson, just because it makes Florida fans so irate anytime Miami or Florida State win. So I'm going Miami. I'm going to root for an upset.
Toledo and UMass.
8 people will watch this game.
$2 tickets on StubHub.
Moving on. Indiana and I think Michigan State.
Michigan State,
Yep.
yep. 3:30, yep.
You know, they could actually be a little bit off in the first half just because, there was a whole lot of partying this week.
Upset special. Indiana beats Michigan State.
Indiana?
Yep.
No.
That's what I've been waiting all day to say. Indiana is going to beat Michigan State. And Indiana I think they got pounded last week. It was either last week or the week before. They lost by like 20 to somebody. But Indiana's going to beat them. Michigan State's going to come out flat. And I don't think Michigan State is that good. I think Indiana's going to upset them.
Indiana only got beat by a field goal last week, but they lost to Rutgers, and they gave it 55 to Rutgers.
Who'd they play the week before that?
The week before that, they got beat by Penn State.
Penn State.
By 3 touchdowns.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, Indiana, they played Ohio State close, but they put everybody else close too. They only beat Western Kentucky by a field goal.
Oh, geez.
So, I mean,
I'm still going with it.
they're 17-point
special.
underdogs, Nate. Come on.
Bet the farm.
If Michigan State is any kind of a football team, they've got to come out and dominate this game because what we talked about earlier, if you're on the selection committee, you're taking a hard look at that Michigan game from last week. So now Michigan State has got to come out, and they got to show everybody that they're for real, and they got to get everybody back on that bandwagon a little bit.
They were relying on the Oregon game. When they beat Oregon, I think they thought, well, that's our big win. we nothing else matters. As long as we take care of business, we'll be fine. That Oregon win is nothing. I think Michigan State is probably a top 15 team, a top 20 team, but I don't think they're a number 7 team in the country. And I don't think they're a playoff team either.
Number 23, Duke, Virginia Tech. Duke 5-1, Virginia Tech 3-4, but I'm not completely convinced of Duke.
What's the line on that? Virginia Tech. I would think Virginia Tech would be favored in that.
They are 2.5 points.
I'll go Duke.
Not often. I mean, they're from the same, but like you said, I mean, Duke still hadn't, and I know this is not Duke's first time in the top 25. David Cutcliffe has got this program on the upswing, but it's still hard for me to get used to the idea that Duke is a top 25 team. So, they'll have to prove it to me. I'm going to go with Virginia Tech.
Oklahoma at Texas Tech.
Oklahoma. This is the actual game where the guy got kicked out of Texas Tech and is now starting for Oklahoma. The quarterback.
Yeah, I can't think of his name.
It starts with a B, I think, but I believe he played for Kingsbury and either got kicked out or was told that he wouldn't have a scholarship, I think is what it was. That's what it was. He started as a walk-on, started the whole year. They wouldn't they wouldn't give him a scholarship, so he left for Oklahoma. Now he's a starting quarterback for a highly ranked Oklahoma team where Texas Tech isn't ranked at all. So I think there's going to be I think he's going to play a great game. It's at Oklahoma. I'll say Oklahoma wins pretty easily.
And they're favored by 2 touchdowns. And their resume looks pretty good. They controlled West Virginia, and that's a good West Virginia team. They dominated Kansas State last week. I mean, you take out Texas, Oklahoma is still undefeated. The Texas game was inexplicable, but maybe that was just a burp along the way for Oklahoma. But Texas A&M is averaging 623 yards a game. So I'm not convinced.
They have that fun and gun style, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Baker Mayfield, that's his name. Baker Mayfield.
I think Oklahoma wins, but I think it's going to be close. I think Texas Tech is going to cover in this game.
Kansas and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State 14 in the country, 6-0. Kansas 0.
Awful. This will be a
6.
blowout. Yep.
Kansas couldn't beat Huntsville Middle School right now. I mean, why
That's
are we
true.
even talking about
That's
anybody that they're playing?
Talk about a team that is just. I mean, there is no reason for them to be that bad year after year.
And they're usually not that bad. I mean, they have reached a new low this year, and you're right. There's no excuse for it. When they're actually on TV and I actually stop on their game for a minute and watch, and usually that's what it is a minute. I wonder why. How do you let yourself as a program get to that point? They're terrible. Maybe the worst Power 5 team ever. And there have been some bad ones, but I'm thinking Kansas is up there.
Yeah, I agree.
Florida State, Georgia Tech. Florida State 9th in the country at 6-0. Georgia Tech, 2-5, not very good.
No, and when Notre Dame played Georgia Tech was ranked higher than Notre Dame when they played each other, I think. But Georgia Tech is they're not a good football team. But a lot of people are saying that Georgia Tech might give FSU fits, and this could be a closer game but I have to think FSU is going to beat them pretty easily.
And Florida State is not getting much love from the pollsters at this point, so it's time for them to turn in a big performance. I mean, if they're going to make the playoffs, and you got to think the winner of the ACC undefeated is not going to be left out. But I mean, stranger things have happened, and as we've already said, there's going to be somebody that's deserving that's going to be left out.
And I would say a one-loss ACC champion will definitely be left out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's time for Florida State to pour it on.
Yep.
I mean, they got to pour it on somebody. They're averaging 33 points per game with a schedule that is not that difficult.
No, they haven't played anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, they have not been impressive. I mean, I know why they're not ranked that highly despite being 6-0.
They have a good running back, but their defense has been a little sketchy, and they really don't put together drives. They rely on that Dalvin Cook to break a long run.
They scored 14 points against Boston College. Now, Boston College didn't score in that game, but 14 points against Boston College.
Yeah.
It's time for Florida State to beat somebody convincingly.
Yep.
And I think Georgia Tech is a good place to
Could
start.
be. Could be.
Texas A&M and Ole Miss coming off the loss from Memphis, 5-2. A&M 5-1. I think this is where Ole Miss bounces back. I think they get the win over A&M, and we have two lost teams in the West.
I think that A&M's going to roll. I don't think Ole Miss should be ranked at this point because not just because they got 2 losses, but the way that they have lost those games. Florida drills them, and then they get drilled by Memphis, and Memphis is really good, but Memphis is still Memphis. I mean, maybe the best team they've ever had, but
Still
you
Memphis.
just expect there to be a little bit of separation between Memphis and an SEC West school. To me, I don't think Ole Miss needs to be ranked, and I think that Texas A&M has been. To me, they looked good against Alabama last week, even though they lost. I think Texas A&M wins big.
I think if Ole Miss wasn't in the SEC, they wouldn't be ranked right now. But they did beat Alabama. But a lot of people will say Alabama had like 5 turnovers. But it's still, I agree with you. Ole Miss is not a good football team. Texas A&M will beat them by 10.
Western Kentucky at 6-1, and LSU number 5 in the country, undefeated thus far. I think LSU just keeps on trucking.
Yeah, they'll have about 400 yards rushing in this game.
I think they pull the running back after the first half.
I don't know. Can they do that? He's in a Heisman race.
He already won the Heisman.
True. Good point.
He just needs to break. Like if he breaks a couple of big runs, then it won't matter. They've got that other guy too. That freshman is good too. But this won't be a game.
Utah and USC.
This was going to be my upset special. I was going to say USC, but guess what? USC is picked to win by 3. So that's why it can't be my upset special. But I say USC beats them.
Everybody has been doubting Utah. Suddenly, the Oregon game doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, even though they clobbered them,
They did.
it doesn't. Matter of fact, I think they just scored again on Oregon, but it doesn't mean anything because Oregon is not good. But they still look pretty good against Michigan.
They did.
And Michigan, I think, proved to everybody last week that they were legit. I think Utah's a good football team, but USC has also got a lot of talent, and they're better than the 3-3 record indicates. I think they showed against Notre Dame last week that even with all the controversy and Sark being fired, sometimes a new coach is a breath of fresh air, even in the middle of the season. Didn't prove much for South Carolina, but for the other USC, I thought they looked good last week. So I'm not going to be surprised to see USC pull this one off. But if Utah is legit, this is their opportunity to prove it because there are a lot of people in this country that don't think they're legit. So they need to win this one by 10, 14 points. I think they're capable, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised to see an upset. I guess I'm taking the middle of the road on that one.
Who'd you pick?
I'm going Utah.
Okay.
Ohio State and Rutgers.
Rutgers.
Rutgers,
Wishful
the trifecta. Yep. All right. Washington at Stanford.
If Rutgers does beat Ohio State, I will be so happy, but that there's no way that's going to happen. But I'm sorry.
Hey, we've moved on. You're on the
I'm
record.
sorry.
Rutgers is going to win.
Yep. Rutgers is going to win that. Washington and Stanford.
Stanford's starting to roll. If I was thinking about this the other day, Stanford lost their first game of the year to Northwestern. I think they only scored like 10 points. If they could redo that game, they would probably be top 5 right now. Maybe even one of the top 4 teams that people are saying going to the playoff. But because I believe the game started at noon coming from the West Coast. So that for them it was like a 9 o'clock game in the morning. And not that that's an excuse, but still they scored way below their average. And against the Northwestern team that has kind of been exposed lately, I think if they could replay that game, Stanford beats them by about 30. Stanford wins this game and continues and basically wins the. I think Stanford's going to win the Pac-12.
And here's the thing with Stanford and their 5 wins. They have increased their point production every game. I mean, they scored 31 on UCF, and that was because it was under control and they called off the dogs in the fourth quarter. But, I mean, they put up 56 on a really good UCLA team last week, so I think Stanford is going to win probably by as much as they want to win by. I mean, they're going to score 50-plus on Washington.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and now to the game of the week. Tennessee versus Alabama. I have Tennessee coming up with the upset. As we said earlier, 3-3. They're a much better than a 3-3 team. And Alabama, they're looking sharp. They're looking really good. But Butch Jones, as Nate will tell you, has built that facility. And Tennessee gets the upset.
Alabama looked sharp last week, but that was Alabama last week. I mean, this is an Alabama team that's been inconsistent this year. They had about 18 turnovers against Ole Miss, lost that game. Didn't look really all that good against Georgia. I mean, they beat them convincingly, but Georgia, Mark Richt, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's a stupid statement. They dominated that Georgia game pretty good. They didn't impress me that much, but I didn't watch it live. I caught the highlights on SportsCenter. We're looking at the box score. Didn't look good at all against Arkansas. I mean, they didn't score. They didn't get on track until the fourth quarter of that football game. Lane Kiffin looked like a deer in the headlights for the first three quarters. Arkansas, one of the worst defenses statistically in the SEC, even though they had just come off of shutting down Tennessee as well. So maybe they were just underranked statistically. But to me, I said last week that if Alabama gets their offense figured out, they're going to be the national champion. They did look good against Texas A&M, but still, they've had their moments this year where they have not looked good. They're a 14-point favorite. I think Tennessee covers. One thing you like about this game, if you're a Tennessee fan, Tennessee has got a fighter's chance. They got a puncher's chance in this one. Most of the time in the last 8 years when Tennessee and Alabama have played, you could not say that. So that gives me, as a Tennessee fan, that gives me hope. I'm not going to predict an upset. I think Alabama wins by a couple of possessions, but I think Tennessee covers.
I agree. I think Alabama will win. I think if Alabama doesn't win, you beat me to the punch, it's going to be Lane Kiffin's fault because he's going to try to do some passing or some.
He's going to try to pass the ball.
Well, here's the thing.
That was almost as silly as me saying that Alabama didn't look good against Georgia.
No, if he lines up and he runs the ball, they will win the game. If he thinks his quarterback is going to be anything more than a game manager, then that's where they get into trouble. I think he has to let Coker just manage the game, just like they used to do 5 years ago when they had like McCarron and all that. He needs to hand the ball off, do play action, hit a couple of bootlegs, something like that, but no more than that. If he starts getting fancy and tries to throw it all over, Tennessee will hang in the game, and then they'll have a puncher's chance. And who knows if Dobbs has a good game? He's got talent. He has a good game. He starts picking apart that defense, starts running the ball. That's the only way they're going to upset them, is if Kiffin doesn't just slam the ball down their throats.
Well, and you would think Kiffin is smart enough to know what he's got to do, but he is Lane Kiffin.
Yes.
He is an airhead sometimes.
Yes.
Remember the Ohio State game in the semifinals last
Absolutely.
year? Everybody in the country is saying, why don't you run the football in the fourth quarter? But Lane Kiffin wasn't thinking that.
They were running for 10 yards a carry or something, but yet he would it's mind-boggling to have those running backs back there and not I would run them until they can't run anymore.
I don't think Tennessee's front seven can stop Alabama's running game. But you could be onto something. I mean, Kiffin is going to look at Tennessee's corners. He knows they're weak on the corners. He may try to exploit that a little bit. And, hey, if Kiffin can pull something boneheaded out of his rear end for this game, that would be outstanding.
Yep, and a turnover here or there, special teams play, all of a sudden you're looking at a 23-21 in the fourth quarter. Dobbs gets hot, hits a couple of plays. All of a sudden you got an upset.
And that's one area you hit on, special teams. That is an area where Tennessee has got an advantage against anybody that they face on their schedule anyway. I mean, field goal kicking is a little bit shaky, but punting is outstanding. Kick returns are obviously outstanding. Punt returns are outstanding. Kick coverage has been tremendous this year. and so is punt coverage. Tennessee is really, really good on special teams. So if you get into the fourth quarter and you've got a tight football game, that can be the difference, as we obviously saw last week, Michigan and Michigan State. I mean, that is the difference in so many close football games. And Butch Jones makes that a point of emphasis for his football teams, and he'll say that over and over in his press conferences. He says Tennessee may be the only team in the country that practices special teams every single practice. I don't know. I'm clinging to any hope I can find.
Oh, Tennessee's going to win this game.
The only
It'll
thing that
happen.
worries me is Alabama seems like every year they have one game during the regular season where they kind of, come out flat, have a couple of turnovers. They really already had that game. That's the only thing that worries me is that they're going to come out. See, they're in elimination mode. They really
So is Tennessee.
well, not for the yeah, for the Citrus Bowl.
Hey, no
Sorry,
kidding. I mean,
don't. That's a Spurrier joke.
no kidding. I think, probably even with with Greer gone, Florida, I don't think they're going to lose more than a game or two. So probably Tennessee is already eliminated. But if Tennessee were to win this game, they can make a legitimate stake to being in the hunt for the SEC East. So they're kind of in elimination mode too. I would hope Tennessee, Alabama. It's October. Tennessee's getting ready to play Alabama. You don't need any extra motivation if you're Tennessee or Alabama because it's such a big rivalry for both teams. More so for Tennessee, not only because they haven't won since Nick Saban has been there, but also because Alabama-Auburn is a bigger game for Alabama. And not that they take Tennessee lightly by any means, but this is the game on the schedule. And young Tennessee fans, they think it's all about Florida. They don't remember what it was like all the way up really until the mid-'90s, until Spurrier became the monkey on Philip Fulmer's back. It was Tennessee, Alabama. That was all that mattered. That was all that mattered when the season began, and that was all that mattered up until the game was played. So Tennessee should have plenty of motivation, you would hope, going into this game. I don't know. It's not going to be enough to carry them to a win, I don't think, but we'll see how it turns out.
Oh, they will win. Tennessee will win this game.
What was the deal with Fulmer and Alabama? Like afterwards, where he wasn't allowed to, or he wasn't able to go back there or something? Wasn't there?
They had a subpoena on him, and then they were trying to serve it. And SEC Media Days are in Hoover, so if Phil Fulmer shows up at SEC Media Days, he will get served with a subpoena. And he finally, towards the end, did show up.
What was?
Honestly, I don't know all the details. Wikipedia would be your friend on that one, but. It goes back to
I remember them saying that they were wondering if Fulmer was going to show up because I guess that's what it was. They were going to give him the subpoena. But
Fulmer was the key player in Alabama landing on major probation in the late 90s. Alabama almost got the death penalty, and it was because of Philip Fulmer. And so some key Alabama boosters then filed a lawsuit against
Did he
Fulmer.
tip them off?
He did. He turned them into the NCAA.
Wow.
Go Vols.
And Alabama will hate him until he dies because of that.
I guess so. That makes total sense now.
Well, this brings us to our last segment of the day. And this segment is brought to you by Brennan's Foot and Ankle Care. Talk about feet. This guy loves them. Your top 4 for going into Week 8, if the season were to end today, who would be your playoff contenders?
It's going to be probably a little bit different than I was last week, but I still have Clemson, but I have Clemson at number 4. I have LSU at number 1, Baylor at number 2, Ohio State at number 3, and Clemson at number 4.
My number 1 is Baylor. My number 2 is Utah. I'm torn after that. TCU has got such a phenomenal wide receiver. Throw the ball up and he's going to go grab it, and that's going to pay dividends for them in a big game. They get really explosive offense. I think I didn't have them in that mix last week, but I think they need to be there. LSU, I think at some point they're so one-dimensional that's going to come back to bite them, and for a while it looked like it might last week against Florida. They pulled that out. I'm going to say Baylor, Utah, Clemson, TCU.
I have Baylor, Utah, LSU, and Michigan State. There's something to be said about a play like that at the end of the game. I go back to 98,
Destiny.
Tennessee and Arkansas. It's destiny. They're to make it to the playoff and then lose to the SEC.
I can see that.
The moral of the story is that there is way too early, and picking a top 4 now is hard, and picking a top 4 in December is going to be just brutal.
I think the other moral to that story is we don't like Ohio State.
That's true.
No love for the Buckeyes, and they're number 1 in the AP, number 1 in the coaches.
I really see you have Utah in there, but I can't see them beating everybody in that. I think the Pac-12 is going to be left out. Like if you had to, let me ask you this: if you have to pick and not where it is now, but pick a conference to be left out, because one of them has to be left out, or 2 if Notre Dame makes it. But I don't think that's likely.
Or if Memphis makes it.
Okay, please do not compare Notre Dame to Memphis. I will strike that from the record. Edit that out, what he just said. But no, seriously, which conference, if you had to predict right now at the end of the year, which conference is going to be left out?
Big Ten.
ACC.
No, I'm kidding. Big Ten's not going to be left out.
gonna
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, I think ACC by far is right now the front runner to be left out.
See, the only thing about that is I think they're going to be undefeated.
And that could happen. I mean, regardless of how things are shaking out right now, you get to the end of the season, if you got an undefeated ACC team, they're probably going to be in. And so, yeah, you may be right. Pac-12 could be left out, but SEC could be left out just as easily as the Pac-12. There is a lot of football left to be played in the SEC.
But it's going to have to be 2 losses, I think.
It will have to be 2 losses.
Yeah.
So Alabama is going back to the playoff this year, unless my prediction for this weekend is true, where Tennessee beats Alabama, and then LSU will go to the playoff.
I think that if I got to pick one right now, I would pick Alabama. I think with their defense and their running game, they still have Lane Kiffin, but at some point you think, I don't know, maybe Kiffin's bigger than Spurrier. Maybe that's it. Maybe. I mean, I'm sorry, Saban, Spurrier, and Satan. And they're all 3 in the same 3-piece in a pot.
They play cards.
Yeah. But anyway, Kiffin is a lot bigger than Saban, so maybe that's it. Maybe maybe he just can't physically control him. You know, I mean, there have been issues or rumors that there have been physical altercations between those 2 guys this season. A lot of other rumors too, but I don't guess we can go into those. But
I'll say the winner of the LSU-Alabama game, I would say I'm 100% confident will make the playoff. Because I don't see, if LSU beats Alabama in that, I think LSU will beat Florida in the championship and make the playoff.
I would agree, except I think Texas A&M is still the dark horse in the SEC West. I mean, they could step in and really fool things up. But, yeah, I mean, at first of the season, everybody was saying there's no way an SEC West team gets in undefeated. Well, that now looks like it could happen. I mean, it had to be LSU, obviously, but it could happen. Early in the season, we said it was possible that the champion of the SEC has 2 losses, but as things are shaking out, Auburn is nowhere nearly as good as anybody thought they would be.
No.
Ole Miss is not as good as anybody thought they would be. Mississippi State is not. Arkansas is not. I mean, it's definitely those 3 at the top: LSU, Alabama, and Texas A&M. So, it looks a lot more probable right now, but I'm just saying Texas A&M is still a dark horse candidate to really mess things up for the SEC in the playoffs. Probably not going to happen, but it could.
And Florida, I think, if this quarterback, Harris, continues to get better, I think they're capable of upsetting somebody, in the championship game. Is what like if LSU runs the table, I don't think it's going to be a slam dunk that the West is going to win that game.
You're right. With Florida's defense, they're going to be any game they play.
They could. It's not an easy.
Yeah,
game.
they are that good. I don't know if Florida's defense is better than Alabama's, but it's definitely right there.
Yeah.
They're neck and neck for the best in the SEC and the best in the country. And I just don't know about Harris. Because I saw him last year, and if he's impressive as we go down the stretch run of this season, then I think Jim McElwain deserves a lot of credit because he was not that impressive a year ago under Will Muschamp's system.
He's probably coach of the year if they win the East, don't you think?
Oh, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
where that program was at, and we knew they had talent. We knew Will Muschamp was a terrible coach, but I mean, you don't just come in and kind of the same situation we talked about Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan State got a gift on a silver platter with that punt. Well, Florida kind of did too. Now the difference there is Florida earned theirs a little bit on that fourth down for the 61-yard touchdown against Tennessee, but 99% of the time, that's not going to happen. That was a boneheaded – on Tennessee, it wasn't so much a boneheaded play. It was a boneheaded coaching decision. But Florida should not be undefeated right now. But they are. They did make the play. They did score the 61-yard touchdown. And you got to hand it to McElwain. He's done a fantastic job.
He has.
And that is this week's edition of the AyerWaves Media Sports Show. Name coming to you next week. Take us out on airwaves.com and through the AyerWaves YouTube channel. Coming to you on terrestrial radio soon. For Nate Brennan and Ben Garrett, I am Josh Ayers. We will see you next week as we roll into week 9 of the college football season.